Hello everybody, I'm Silly. This will be the one-shot entitled Homework is Pointless by lemon_lime26 on AO3. This is part 1 of a series. Summary. Midoriya, could you tell me the answer to question 5, please? Aizawa said, holding out a paper in front of him. Izuku glanced at it. 26. Aizawa nodded, setting the paper down. Are you aware of the fact that that question was on your math homework last night? Izuku gave him a confused look, unsure of where he was going with this. Midoriya, I called you in here to find out why you aren't doing the homework assigned to you by your teachers. Izuku blinked a few times before answering a question he felt was obvious. It's pointless. Ever since the day Izuku was announced quirkless, he knew he'd never be treated fairly. He was 5 years old when he stopped being affected by insults. Normally, he could have been forgotten by his teachers or play the kid card enough to earn himself some sympathy and be ignored. Izuku was 6 when he learned to never attract attention to himself. His peers were awful, which was incredibly ironic considering they all wanted to be heroes when they got older. But he managed to make it through school, for the most part. At the age of 6, Izuku learned what it was like to have someone's quirk used against him. However, one thing was always constant. The teachers didn't care. Or, at least, they did until he got to middle school. Izuku was smart, really smart, and he knew it. Schoolwork was always so easy to him, barely taking any effort to complete. He thought of it as a blessing for most of his life, one misery in a sea of crap. Yet it seemed his middle school teachers were not happy with the fact that a quirkless kid was smarter than everyone else in the class. So the teachers failed him, no matter how well he had done on the actual assignment. Or they did, until it almost resulted in him having to be held back a year. It was almost funny seeing their faces as they were told that their mistakes would cause them to spend another year in their classes. They all had to go back and fix his grades, to make sure they weren't forced to teach him anymore. That's when Izuku realized he held all the power. From that point on, he stopped doing all of his homework. His teachers were absolutely outraged, complaining over and over to the principal about the boy. But the man refused to spend the rest of his week on paperwork to have a quirkless brat expelled. So instead, even if he didn't have to do any of the work, Izuku passed every assignment. Sure, his grades might have not been very high, but to be fair, he wasn't really expecting them to be. That's how one Izuku Midoriya passed middle school. But now he's in UA. Not all his classes required a written report. Now he had to put in effort in order to be what he always dreamed of, a hero. And he was stoked. Do you know how boring it is to attend school for absolutely no reason? He knew the work, so why should he have to waste 8 hours of his time listening to other people learn about it? When Izuku didn't know something, he searched for answers until he found them. He memorized the steps, vocabulary, and layout of everything he finds. At this point, it was just second nature. He helped an old lady who spoke English get her cat down from a tree. Upset he couldn't understand her, he learned English. When he was done with that, he got bored and branched off into other languages. He learned Spanish, French, and for some reason, Arabic. If he found something he didn't know, he learned it, which was awesome because there were almost an infinite amount of things to learn. That did not include basic English, standard high school math, standard high school history, standard high school science, and you get the point. He didn't know how to fight, he wanted to learn that. All Might taught him how to build up strength, but Izuku's not All Might. Brute strength will only get him so far. He learned how to make friends, sort of. It has only really been a few weeks of school, and everyone in the past wanted him dead, except his mom. What did you expect? Currently, he was making his way over to the teacher's lounge after being asked by Aizawa to meet him there once school was finished. His group of friends had been worried for him, but he just gave them a smile and grabbed his things once class was over. He gave a few small but firm knocks on the door, which was later opened by Aizawa himself. After motioning him inside, Aizawa took a seat at his desk as Izuku glanced around the room. Everything was pretty normal, if he ignored the not-so-secretive glances from the other teachers. "Do you know why you're here, problem child?" Aizawa finally spoke up, tone flat and emotionless. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck and shrugged. He honestly didn't know. Aizawa hummed before grabbing a paper from a stack off his desk and holding it out in front of him. "Midoriya, could you tell me the answer to question 5, please?" Now Izuku was really confused. He had no idea why he was being asked to solve a random question. Nonetheless, he glanced down at the paper. About 12 seconds passed before he answered. 26. Aizawa nodded, setting the paper down. "Are you aware of the fact that that exact question was on your math homework last night?" Now he was very confused. Sure, he knew that it was there. He may not do the work, but he still glances at it to make sure he knows where the class is at. Yet he had no idea where his homeroom/law and ethics teacher was going with this. Aizawa sighed. "Midoriya, I called you in here to find out why you aren't doing the homework assigned to you by your teachers. You clearly know how, and you have no problem answering any questions thrown at you during class." Izuku blinked a few times. That's what this was about? The answer to that should be easy. However, he responded anyway. It's pointless. He had the other teacher's full attention now. "What do you mean, pointless?" Aizawa pushed. Izuku frowned. "I already know it. Why would I waste my time on something I already know? If the point of homework is to further learn the lesson, then there's no point in giving it to someone who knows it already. If the point of homework is to prove you know it, then the questions asked in class should be more than enough to suffice. And since I know you need work samples, I do the work handed out in class anyway. I see no point in the homework." Part of him was expecting to be slapped, yelled at, or scolded. Another part of him, the one who knew Mr. Aizawa's tendencies, was almost certain he was about to be expelled. He was not expecting, however, the absolutely stunned faces of his teachers and the sudden clapping he heard from the side of the room. Turning, he found himself looking directly at Nezu, the principal of UA. The animal in question gave him a large smile. "Ah, yes, that I understand. It is truly tedious to do something of absolutely no value. Don't you agree, Aizawa? Rather illogical, wouldn't you say?" The man in question frowned for a moment before nodding. "It is a problem, though. We, as a school, cannot simply have you doing nothing for at least half your classes. I'd like to propose a solution, if you wouldn't mind." At first, he thought he was talking to Aizawa, but then his eyes met the principal's and he found himself nodding. "I would like you to come to my office first thing tomorrow to take a test of sorts." He tilted his head. "Test? What kind?" Nezu's smile grew. "You'll have to come and see now, won't you?" Izuku felt his own lips twitch up with the hint of a smirk. It's been a while since he found something interesting to do, so he might as well. Nezu's grin turned feral, the rat somehow knowing his answer already. "I'll see you tomorrow then, Mr. Midoriya. You may go home now. Apologies for keeping you." With a final bow to his teachers, he turned and left, thinking about everything that could possibly be on the test. "What are you doing?" Aizawa grumbled to his boss once the problem child had left. "I'm simply giving Midoriya a chance to show what he can do. Is there a problem with that?" Nezu turned to Aizawa. The man in question frowned. "Yes, I don't need you corrupting my student." "Oh, please," Nezu waved off. "You worry too much." Aizawa scoffed. "Yeah, right." The next day, Izuku came to school with a small bounce to his step. He wasn't sure what Principal Nezu had planned, but he was excited to find out. He made his way over to the student's proclaimed rat god, hitting his thigh with his palm as he went along. The door swung open on its own when he stepped in front of it. Pretty useful. Saves time. "Mr. Midoriya, perfect timing. Come on in," Nezu cheerfully called out. Entering the room, he saw the principal sitting behind his desk, drinking his tea. A similar cup of tea on the opposite side of his desk, right in front of Izuku. He took a seat, reaching forward and grabbing the hot drink. He took a sip, not losing eye contact with the rat for even a second. Eventually, Nezu smiled. I'm glad you could make it, Mr. Midoriya. Tell me, do you like to learn? Izuku nodded without the slightest hint of hesitation. He did, just not in a classroom. Nezu reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a thick stack of papers. You're excused from classes today. Instead, I would like you to focus on filling this out. It will progressively get harder as it goes along, so know that you are not expected to know everything. I would just like to see where you are at. Izuku nodded, taking the packet and looking over it. All right, do you care where I do it? Wherever you're comfortable, Nezu answered. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Wherever. Nezu's smile grew slightly wider. Wherever. All the teachers and students had a 30-minute break after lunch. Most students would just stay in the cafeteria chatting with friends. As such, most teachers took the time to relax in the teacher's lounge before classes started back up, which is how every teacher saw the absolutely confused face of Lunch Rush as they walked into the room. Ectoplasm was the first to ask the question, Everything okay? Lunch Rush was silent for a moment before speaking. Can someone explain to me why I saw a small, green-haired child working on a ridiculously large packet on top of the refrigerator in the kitchen? Everyone stared at him for a second before Aizawa sighed. That would be Midoriya. Nezu gave him a test to see what he knows of the school's curriculum. Unfortunately for us, the principal told him he was allowed to take the test wherever he wanted. The kid always takes everything too seriously. Quite a few teachers ended up trying to hold in their laughs. Yamada didn't even bother, just bursting out into laughter despite the dirty looks his husband sent him. Turns out there was such thing as karma. When Yamada walked into his classroom, the listener was waiting for him underneath his desk. They didn't want anything, no, but they were more than happy to just chill under his desk and work on their questions. For the most part, Yamada forgot about him. The listener didn't bother him, and he didn't bother the listener. He didn't even think the class knew about the fact that the kid was under there. When classes ended, he grabbed his things to move to the next classroom. Midoriya followed. He had to admit it was amusing to hear his kids shriek and see their absolutely shocked faces at discovering they'd had a visitor the whole time. Midoriya didn't come with him to his next class. In fact, Yamada didn't see him whatsoever after that, or at least all the way up until the end of school. Turns out he spent the rest of his time doing his test outside under a tree. It was rather cold out though, so he was glad that the kid came in wearing a sweater. Nezu was waiting for him. Izuku walked up to his principal and gave him the packet. He almost made it to the end. A good handful of questions were bound to be incorrect, since he guessed on a small chunk at the end that he hadn't yet to learn. The only reason he was able to fill anything out on them was because of small glimpses he caught of similar problems in the past. Ah, thank you, Mr. Midoriya. How did it go? Nezu asked as he took the work out of the teen's hands. Izuku shrugged. Fine. For the most part, it was boring. Some of it I wasn't sure of. Working those out was pretty entertaining. I got frustrated near the end when I stopped recognizing the questions. A small blush was present on his face, like he was embarrassed to admit it. Nezu nodded. Understandable. You're free to leave now. Your mother won't be happy if you're late. Izuku nodded, giving a small bow and leaving to go home. The next morning, all of the teachers walked in to find identical packets on the desks. Each of them was marked on a different section: art history for Midnight, English for Mike, math for Ectoplasm, law and ethics for Aizawa, and science for Cement Toss, and heroics for All Might. Other teachers like Power Loader and Snipe, as well as staff like Recovery Girl and Lunch Rush, had a packet too with sections marked for them anyway. Everyone went over everything for a few minutes on their own before a discussion broke out. I thought the test was supposed to be on the subjects he took, Snipe asked. When no one made the move to comment, he continued. My class is reserved for second and third years, but there's a section for my class on here as well. Midnight gave a confused look. How'd the kid do? Better than he should have. I teach a variety of about 24 different weapons. Sport knows the safeties of almost all of them. He's also confirmed knowing how to use a total of 19 of them proficiently. and another 3 of them at their basic purposes. The other teachers were looking at him with wide eyes as Power Loader nodded. He's not in my sport classes, but he seems to know more than about 85% of my first years and 28 of my second years. Sonny knows quite a few medical procedures, too. If he wasn't so dead set on becoming a spotlight hero, I would have taken him on as an apprentice, Recovery Girl stated. Aizawa let out a hum at the comment. You'd be wrong about that. Most of the teachers in the room turned to look at him, shocked. Meanwhile, All Might looked down at his papers with a frown as Mike, who had already read his husband's portion, nodded. At first, it seemed like Problem Child didn't have a preference, but near the end he mentioned quite a few things, a lot of which leads me to believe he'd much rather be a hero like Hazashi or I than out in the spotlight for the entire world to see. Aizawa explained. Many people turned to his section in the packet and discovered him to be right. It really did sound like the kid would rather not be a major spotlight hero. As a matter of fact, it looked like the kid strongly disliked quite a few top-rank heroes. After some more discussion, the teachers all came to realize how far ahead he was in all of their subjects. He'd almost completely aced Mike's portion if it wasn't for the large scientific words at the end that even the man himself didn't know most of. Nezu entered the room about 5 minutes before class started. Ah, good. It seems like you've all had enough time to look over and discuss Mr. Midoriya's results. Seeing as it's Friday, I will have him go to his normal classes today. However, I think it's best to move him up a few grades in a few of his subjects. He'll be taking art history, science, and weapons training with the 3rd years. Math will be with the 2nd years. He'll continue heroics and law and ethics with the 1st years to gain as much experience as possible. And of course, he's completely tested out of Yamada's class, so I'll replace that time with medical training with Recovery Girl. The support labs will also be open to him, should he choose to pick it up as a hobby. Aizawa frowned. What do we do when he's done with our curriculum then? Once he finishes this year, he'll be done with 3 of his classes. Nezu nodded. That time will be spent with either me, a class of his choosing, or one-on-one sessions with any teachers who are free to improve and learn as much as he can. Most teachers still had questions, but they needed to get to their classes. They'd find their answers one way or another. Izuku received his new schedule from Nezu when he was done with classes. He was surprised, sure, since he hadn't realized that he knew so much. However, he also had a small, content feeling in his chest. He'd finally spent his time at school learning. He'd still get to be with his class at points during the day, so he wasn't isolated, and he'd get to take classes not normally offered to other students. He went home with a bit more pep in his step that day. His mom was ecstatic when he showed her. She even made katsudon to celebrate the accomplishment. Izuku was almost disappointed that it was the weekend. He couldn't wait to start his classes. Thankfully, he knew just how to pass the time. He was going to learn everything he missed or didn't know on that test, if it killed him. Alright everybody, that concludes the one-shot Homework is Pointless. I hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you for listening.